think that I will start officially, and my colleagues will continue to let people in. Warm welcome, good evening to all of you from all corners of South Africa, from Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, from the three centers in South Africa, the Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and then many, many friends from all over the world, many friends from the March of the Living that joined us through the years, many volunteers, staff members, and friends from 11 or 12 countries. We have, of course, people from South Africa, but also from Poland. We have people from Australia, from Norway, from the UK, Canada, Israel, the United States, Macau, the Netherlands, Bosnia, Lithuania, and more are joining. So it is wonderful to welcome you all to the second part of our series about Central Europe and exploring the sites of the Holocaust in Central Europe. And this time it is the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Last time, if you did not catch up the video, it is on our YouTube channel, and that was with our friend Jacob Shoshan, a visit in Hungary and Austria. We are wishing all our Jewish friends Chag Sameach, Shana Tova, Chag Sukkot Sameach, and all the very, very best for a sweet year and health and joy for the year. Thank you so much for your support, for all our webinars, for all our activities. We so appreciate it. All our team at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center appreciate you supporting all of us. Our center reopened to the public on the 1st of September, and it is buzzing with activities safely, cautiously, all with masks, social distancing, but wonderful activities with groups and workshops happening throughout the week. And we hope that if you are in Johannesburg and you have not been in the center yet, you will make an appointment to come and see our permanent exhibition and our temporary exhibitions. Again, it is very special to have two Holocaust survivors with us. Maud Dam, from originally hidden child in the Netherlands, from the US, and Pinchas Guta, a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto and concentration camps from Canada. Now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce my friend and our friend now, Jacob Shoshan. It is a real pleasure to have you again, and hopefully for many more after tonight. I know Jacob, as I said to many of you before, for over 15 years, and it is a joy to learn from him and to learn with him. Jacob was born in Jerusalem. He is one of the most celebrated tour managers, educators, and guides who has visited 107 countries and led tours in 66 countries on 6 continents. He's fluent in 15 languages. He has background, expertise in Holocaust studies, Sephardic Jewish heritage, Jewish musicology, and so much more. He led the March of the Living South African and international groups since 2005 to Poland, to Israel, to Lithuania, to Latvia, and to Estonia. It is a pleasure to welcome you again to our webinar tonight.
Good evening, everybody, or good morning, wherever it is that you might be. Welcome on board. Nice to see many familiar faces, and looking forward to make new acquaintance and new friendships as we have done in the past. We'll start the presentation. At the end of this trip, everybody's going to get the full presentation. In addition to the pictures and maps, facts and figures, I've embedded dozens of links to website where you can read and find out more in detail about the various places we'll visit. We're all going through very tough times. I couldn't help myself. I wanted to put a little smile on everybody's face because it has been a long time since we were able to travel. So I think everybody will join me feeling the way I feel now, and we'll begin. So as Tali has mentioned, the last time we met, we started in Budapest, Hungary. We went to Vienna. Today, we would travel from Vienna to Bratislava. We'll begin the tour a little of Slovakia and much more. Let me just get the pointer going, sorry. Much more in the Czech Republic, Prague, and subsequently Theresienstadt. Again, a reminder of where we are. Prior to the First World War, this was the terrain, the domain of this huge Habsburg royalty, the old monarchy, as they call it, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which included not just Austria and Hungary, but big chunks of the neighboring countries from Poland to Ukraine, to many of the former Yugoslav republics, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and some more all the way to the Adriatic coast in the Mediterranean. The languages that were spoken were different in different locations, but they were spread all over the place. Something which is very important to remember is that everything we talked about when we talked about Hungary should relate to most of the stories in Slovakia, with the exception of the languages spoken by the Jews who spoke the local language. Some of them spoke Yiddish. Behind Bratislava, where we'll start today, Yiddish was not spoken so much. So that's the trip from Vienna to Bratislava through the Czech Republic, or Czechia as they prefer to be called today, to Prague. Czechoslovakia was born after the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it consisted of the western part, which is Bohemia, Moravia and Silesia. We have Upper Silesia, Lower Silesia. One of them is in Poland nowadays, and the other one is in the Czech Republic. Slovakia, which included big chunks of an area, the Carpathorus, which today is in the Ukraine. Today's country is a little different. You can see the size, you can see the population. The numbers of the Jewish population are a little tricky. Now, we don't even know, as the case was in the other countries we have visited, but we estimate between 2,000 to 3,000 Jews live in the country. This figure is a bit of a problem because in 1940, it included many Jews who fled into Slovakia from Germany when the different laws and restrictions pertaining to the Jews were introduced. So the number must have been around 80,000 in that part of the country, which you couldn't divide because everything was Czechoslovakia for a while until 1938 when things have changed. But this figure is a realistic figure, unfortunately. We can say that only 5,000 Jews of Slovakia have survived the Holocaust after all these events. So Slovakia consists of a few geographical regions, the high Tatras in the north bordering with Poland, the low Tatras, the central mountains. The interesting parts will be the Danubian hills and the Danubian lowlands coming down into the Danube, and Bratislava is nestled right on the banks of the Danube River. Driving through the country, you might find, and I recommend to visit the country. It's a beautiful country and very interesting one. You'll see some magnificent sights. The natural scenery is absolutely beautiful. Fall foliage and different seasons offer different views and vistas. Definitely recommended. Along the road, you will see many beautiful castles. Some of them are medieval, some of them date back to the 17th and 18th centuries. And we come to Bratislava, the capital of today's Slovakia. A very nice town with typical European city with the market square, with the beautiful buildings, with marvelous architecture. dominated by the castle, which is on the hilltop, which can be seen from everywhere in town. Everything is within the walled old city with some, or when they say new city, it is 14th, 15th century, you can imagine, because the city has been there for a long time. And it is quite interesting to walk around and to explore, to see the residential as well as the public areas with palatial mansions and palaces. The architecture is stunning with lots of statues, sgraffito art, and lovely shopping street, nice outdoor cafes and restaurants, narrow winding lanes, and everything, as I mentioned, dominated by the castle, with some modern additions. Somebody has a very special keen for interesting statues, which cover the whole area where you walk around in the pedestrian zone. You will be amazed at so many and so beautiful, so many interesting statues decorate the streets. Look at this very unusual blue church. You don't really get to see so many interesting sites in one city, a modern memorial, and beautifully illuminated, perfectly safe city to walk during the day and night. The National Theater is a magnificent building. I think you can see beautifully illuminated during day, as well as very, very modern architecture. That's like a modern shopping mall, which is quite interesting, even just to look at the building itself. And as you walk, you begin to discover Jewish traces. You're gonna see, it's a little blur, but I think you can make out the Hebrew characters on the different houses. Of course, we will be looking at everything from above, because over the years, the city went up and up, leaving lots of these monuments below street level, not to mention the fact that many of the Jewish institutions traditionally were built below street level, so they can still have a nice high ceiling without showing itself dominating the skyline. So that has been a very, very typical architecture, Jewish architecture, if I may say so, in this part of the world. I'll contradict myself by saying there is no Jewish architecture. Jews build according to what they've seen around them. There is no special pattern in architecture. We have the different elements inside. The ritual takes place in a certain pattern, whatever you, but the buildings, that's the main synagogue, the only really functioning synagogue really today in Slovakia, and it is very ornate. It was redone a couple times since their independence, and it is quite impressive as a building. Next is a very nice, small, but very nicely done Jewish museum with typical Jewish artifacts. It is geared not only for us, because most of the stuff, sorry to say, is not necessarily local, but it is made here to show what is it about Judaism to the visitors, to the non-Jewish visitors, from school kids to teachers to regular visitors who'll come. So the museum is done in a very, very nice way. Unfortunately, it was not always, as you can imagine, safe and sound. For example, there was this ancient cemetery, which has been used for centuries by the community, by the Jewish community of Bratislava, but in 1943-44, they have decided to destroy the cemetery because they wanted to build something else. We'll talk later about very special people who were very active in the Jewish community, which made the fate of the Jews here, in spite of the large numbers of the victims, a little different. They managed to survive, many of them, until 43, 44, thanks to the activity of some people we'll mention. So they have removed the remains of many of the Jews, except for very few chosen ones. They were given special permit to leave in his place in situ the remains of Chatam Sofer, Rabbi Moses Schreiber, one of the most outstanding Jewish scholars, a real sage. Personally, I like him very much because he was captivated with the idea of, even before they called it Zionism, but the land of Israel. You can see behind me, so you know I'm in Jerusalem now, in Israel. And he was an incredible writer, somebody who did not compromise on many principles, but was very open to accommodate new and liberal winds that were blowing his way. Something very interesting, I couldn't resist it, because during this Rosh Hashanah, we go and we look back, and we found some things that he has written 190 years ago. Can you imagine? He predicted that the Jewish year we have just ended will be a very bad year, and the next year we just started a few days ago will be a very good one. So I had to share it with you. Look at the link, it is in English, so you can read it, and I find it absolutely amazing. I didn't talk about him in the longest time, and when I was preparing for this presentation, all of a sudden I came across his revelations, his prophecy, if you want. Quite interesting, Khatam Sofer. So the tomb is underneath. They paved the road over what used to be the cemetery, over what used to be the Jewish quarter, but they made special provisions to let us visit the tomb. We have to go underneath. We'll enter this kind of bunker, and inside, well below ground level, we'll find the tombs of Khatam Sofer. He is a major inspiration, and the tomb is like a major pilgrimage site for many people, inspiring many of the sages who started later on Hasidic courts all over Galicia, southern and central Europe. What I like very much is the artist rendering. Okay, they have a loan, so they put these symbolic tombstones. There is nobody really buried here, but they are present and invisible. I like very much the idea the artist did here. You see, he put like these slabs, these pieces of glass to look like tombstones, but we don't have anybody buried there. And just to remind people, yes, they are almost invisible, but certainly very, very present. A Holocaust memorial was built in the last years, like everywhere in this part of the world and in many other parts of the continent. But now we have to talk about the special story of this country. Before it was Slovakia, of course, it was Czechoslovakia. And a very special story everybody knows has to do with the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland was this territory surrounding the Czech lands. It happens to be mostly mountainous area, and those mountains are loaded, a treasure grove of gold and silver and metals and minerals. Here you have a tiny little kingdom within the realm of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, before it was Austrian, when it was just the Kingdom of Hungary back in the 15th, 16th centuries. When the Czech kings have invited, they summoned merchants, people who come and develop this area. So there were many Jews who came, but there were many more Germans, some of them fleeing persecution for religious reasons. These are the times of the big reforms we'll talk about later on. Within the Christian church, people were murdered, people were put to the stake, they were burned alive. So lots of the people moved here. And what you have now in the mid-30s, you have this region which is populated, sometimes an overwhelming majority of the population, not everywhere, ethnic Germans who live within the realm of the Czech lands. It is important to mention because, as you know, the territories were annexed by Germany with the approval, unfortunately, of some of the foreign nations. Here we have an interesting meeting. We have Chamberlain. This is a translator, just an interpreter, Hitler and Mussolini from Italy. And between the three of them, they have determined the fate of millions of people. More than that, this picture is really bewildering. At the same day he got off the plane, he came to London and he's holding the document and he says, "Peace for our time." And answering questions later on in the House, in the Parliament, and by journalists, the major outline was the following. Why should we risk getting the world involved in a war over the fate of a country about which we know absolutely nothing? And that was the attitude. That is what those nations took. a stand concerning the fate of Czechoslovakia. I must say something very important. That is, sometimes history, of course, does not avail us the luxury of saying what if, but at the eve of the war, definitely in September and November 38, a year before the war breaks, the United Powers of Poland, Czechoslovakia, France and England were much superior to that of Germany. If those guys would have stand up, of course they didn't. So as I said, we don't have the luxury of studying history. But just a reminder, this was a country very developed. They had a magnificent industry, heavy industry. They did cars, they did motorcycles, they produced weapons, they did machinery. They were very neat and very organized, very civilized nations. Well, the rest is history. So you know that first Germany annexed the Sudetenland, the area which is around the Czech lands. By the way, the Slovaks couldn't wait for it to happen. And they already contemplated well before that to split and separate from Czechoslovakia. This is a very interesting character. I also have his picture here. And here you'll be able to read about him. Joseph Tiso. He was a Catholic priest, Monsignor Tiso, who couldn't wait, as I mentioned, to split the country. He made himself president of Czechoslovakia before Czechoslovakia was taken over by Slovakia, before Czechoslovakia was invaded and the Germans took over the Czech lands, the Czech Republic of today. I will tell you a little about him. He declared kind of independence. So he was arrested by the president of Czechoslovakia. Hitler arranged to kidnap him from prison, brought him to Berlin to sign a deal with him, saying, okay, I'll make you an independent kingdom, but you must cooperate with me, which he gladly did. And the next thing you know, everybody knows, of course, this document. I just wanted to show, as I mentioned, the controversial figure of the 89,000 in the Wannsee conference document. What starts right now is legislation. The Germans said that the Jewish codex introduced in the Slovakia was more extreme than the ones in Germany. Can you imagine? Stripping Jews of their property, sending thousands of them to labor camps. Look at this. This is a very unusual thing. It was like an identity pin, which they had to wear, and that symbolized that they were essential workers. They were exempted from, going the way the others did to the camps and shipped away. Terrible caricatures appear in the newspapers. Caricatures and slogans painted on the windows, on the walls in the city. Jewish stores are raided, they break in, they sabotage, and what have you. And now comes the most interesting part. Tiso makes an arrangement with the Germans to send the Jews out, and he's willing to pay the Germans for taking the Jews. He's going to pay 500 marks for every Jew removed from Slovakia. Right away, 999 girls are sent to forced labor. Next thing he does, he says, that's not very Christian to separate the girls from the families. Why don't you take the families too? And I'll pay you, provided you promise me you'll never send them back to Slovakia. And that's what happened. Slovakia was the only country who participated with Germany into invading Poland. We always say September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. They didn't do it alone. Slovakian army participated in the invasion into southern Poland on the Tatra mountains. And now their guards organize the transports of the Jews to the various camps. The transports were arranged and conducted by the Hlinka. It was a fascist militia. They were the Slovak guards. And only when the train reached the border with Poland, the SS soldiers got on. And as you probably remember from the maps, Auschwitz is just a short distance away from the border. So most of the work was done by the Slovaks sending Jews mostly to Auschwitz and to Majdanek on the outskirts of Lublin. This is a very troubling story that I personally have great difficulties copying. I was lucky to meet one of these gentlemen. These were two Slovak Jews who were working in Auschwitz in the area called Canada. That's where they were sorting out the plunder. It was sorted, piled and shipped back to Germany and other locations, everything that was confiscated and taken from the Jews. One day they heard the drunk German officer saying, oh, soon Hungarian salami is gonna come here. Hungarian salami was very famous all over Europe, but what he meant was Jews are gonna come. Until now, remember the fall of 1944, most Hungarian Jews were in their homes, in their country, and they continued not the great life, as you recall, but they still managed to survive somehow. When these two gentlemen heard about it, the dominant one was Rudolf. Verba is a name he adopted. That was one of the names he was given on a fake document. They managed to escape from Auschwitz and they went back to Slovakia across the border to share what was happening in Auschwitz. Nobody knew until then. And when they told it, nobody believed. They put them in two separate rooms and they asked them to tell the story, to make drawings and explain how everything was set up. And only when they compared notes and they found out the two of them were telling the same stories, they started sharing it with other people. But unfortunately, nothing was done about it. You'll read about them. One of the people I mentioned who was very special is a very special lady, Lizzie Fleischmann. She managed to send both her daughters to Palestine at the time, but she figured she was responsible. She was very active in the Jewish community. She was in the leadership of the Jewish community. She negotiated with the Germans. She was able to raise funds. There were many, many very, very wealthy Jews in Bratislava. Bratislava in many ways was like a branch, if I would say, an extension of Vienna, but there was even more money in Jewish hands, businesses, banks, insurance, what have you, and she managed to bribe the Germans, and that's why she managed to keep the Jews for years. The transportation stopped in 42, resumed only in 44, in many ways thanks to this lady. Unfortunately, she herself was sent to Auschwitz. She went out on the last transport and she was killed, of course, at a very young age. This picture is of the stumbling stone, the stumbling stones which they put outside the houses where some Jewish people they know about lived. And another lady that, as you know me, those of you who traveled with me before and heard me before, it's always for me very important to highlight the role of the righteous among the nations. Another very brave lady, she was married to a Jewish gentleman and she helped to save the life of her nephew, who was also Gizzi's nephew. Can you imagine? And that is the family. This is the young boy. This picture is taken after the war. He grew up by then. And that's what he looks like now. He lives in Israel, in Kfar Masarik. It's a kibbutz built by Jews who survived, who came from Czechoslovakia, and they honored the president of Czechoslovakia, who was very Philo-Semite, if you may say. And he is the one who made sure, he is very active in Yad Vashem, and he made sure that his auntie will be recognized as a righteous among the Gentiles. There were many others. I put here a fascinating man, Martin Uhr. Read about him, please, in the link attached. He was a sportsman, an athlete, and what he did was absolutely remarkable. But things do not remain quiet. As you know, after the Sudetenland, he made a deal with, as we mentioned, with Monsignor Tiso, with the leader of Slovakia, and Hitler marches into Bohemia and Moravia, declared the Czech lands as the protectorate. Heydrich is appointed to be the head of the government. When we travel now from Bratislava to Prague, we'll stop on the way and visit some beautiful synagogues, and there are many of them. This one is in Prešov, and that will welcome us into, we'll cross the border into the Czech Republic. Again, you see the territory, the population, and again, these troubling figures, almost the same amount probably of Jewish population today, but much larger population before the war, and look at the number of the victims. The Czech Republic is, as you know by now, between Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Poland, and Prague is almost in the heart and center. We mentioned Bohemia, this is Moravia and Silesia, respectively. And again, we travel through magnificent countryside. The land is absolutely beautiful. The castles here are even more impressive. And there is one town I'll spend a minute talking about because I think it's a must. This is Karlovy Vary. This is a spa, one of many, many hot springs locations through these mountains. And I mention it because it was a favorite place for the Jews from Germany, from the Czech land, from Austria. Invariably, that was the highlight of the year. They didn't go like we like to go to Jerusalem today. At that time, that was not really a choice, but they came to Karlovy Vary. That's where everybody would marvel, not only at the setup among the forest and the trees and the mountains with the beautiful houses, but lots of the hot springs. The hot springs are literally in the street, and you walk along these walkways. They have like this promenade, and they have a special cup with a spout. Everybody walks and drinks water from the spout, and everybody buys one to take home with them in a variety of forms and shapes. Now, I think it's ridiculous sometimes because they tell you, you must drink the water within 10 minutes after you got them from the fountain. You shouldn't get more than 100 yards away from the fountain for the water to be effective. I mean, it's a whole amazing tradition, but I thought I'll share it with you. Some more natural scenes. And again, on the way, we'll meet many synagogues. This is one of my favorite in Mikulov, absolutely splendid, beautiful, beautifully decorated. Look at the vaulted ceiling and the inscription on the walls. Not everybody had a prayer book. So the most important prayers were beautifully written in big fonts on the walls of the synagogue. Is that amazing or what? Look at the ceiling. And we have, of course, some other synagogues in other locations. And I could spend, honestly, days and days just traveling from one of these beautiful synagogues to the other until we get to Prague. Prague actually is 4 cities. We have the castle hill, Harajin, the lesser town, a bridge which connects to the old town and the new town. So we'll be visiting all of these places over the next few minutes. This part of the city gave the, and which is seen from everywhere, gave the name the city of 100 spires. Actually, there are even more than 100 spires in the city. No matter where you look, you see some magnificent architecture, and everybody flocks right away to the old town square. It is one of the most stunning squares you can see really anywhere in the world, dominated by the tin church, and has lots and lots of features. Buildings, some of them date back to the 18th century, some of them the end of the 19th and early 20th century. In the center, there is a very special monument to Jan Hus, we'll see later, but everybody now gathers because it's a few minutes before the full hour, and everybody gathers to see the astronomical clock, which is in this location. The people would leave their coffee shops, the restaurants, and everybody will come and stand here to see the clock in operation, the astronomical clock. It shows the hour, it shows the planets, it shows the days of the month, all kind of interesting stuff, and it's centuries old. And you can really spend a long time studying the different elements, especially those figures which stand out, from wisdom to science to charity. Actually, we have music, we have death, which is a reminder. You can see the sand clock, and you can see vanity, and you can see the miser. I mean, so many different characters, and when the clock strikes, they all move around, and it is quite an experience, quite an attraction. And look at these beautiful buildings from the 17th and 18th centuries. This is a unique art form, which is called sgraffito, where they remove the outer layer, exposing the lower layer in different colors plaster, and it's really a magnificent art form. This building, for example, won't show you all of them. We could spend days and days looking at them. This was a fire insurance company. So look only even at the decorations of the building, and on top of the building, can you see we have the firefighters? So they put the character of the firefighters on the roof next to this beautiful mural. Narrow lanes of the town lead us to many places. This is, for example, a bank building. Look at the decorations on this building, some magnificent mosaic work. And this is the agricultural bank, as a matter of fact. That's why we have scenes from like the field and from working the field. This is Jan Hus. He was this reformer who did not approve very much of what was happening in the Catholic Church. He built himself slowly to prominence, delivering hundreds and thousands of sermons until he was able to stand up and say, I do not approve, for which he was reprimanded. He quote, he was set on fire at the stake. So I think it will be interesting for you to read about him and the Hussite movement. They precede the Reformation. They precede the Lutherans like Luther, Zwingli, Kantling. They precede, that was in Czech Republic, but they traveled all over the continent. After we have done the Old Town Square, before we continue, we'll start from the very top. We'll travel to Harajin, to the Castle Hill, where we'll visit the Strahov Monastery to see maybe the most beautiful library anywhere in the world. It is so stunning, between the bookshelves and the collection and the globes. And look at these beautiful murals painted on the walls and on the ceilings. It is really a trip into a never land. Next, we'll go briefly through the Lobkowitz Palace. I will not go through everything because there are dozens of such magnificent palaces in the city. But I'd like to go to the next door, Loreto Monastery, if nothing else, to show you these monstrance. Here is this wonderful lady, the Countess of Krakow. Hi, Anna Maria. And she had a wedding dress. The wedding dress was covered with 6,000 diamonds. She donated all the diamonds to make these monstrance. Can you see that? So we see a picture of the wedding dress. Look at all these diamonds embroidered on her dress. They were clever enough to hide it behind the wall. They put like an additional row of bricks. And when the Germans came in, they never saw it. Everybody knew about it, but they never found it. After we have been to the Loreto Monastery, we'll go into the castle area. We'll start with the President's Palace, which is the office where the President of the Czech Republic works. We'll see, maybe depending on the hour, the changing of the guards, and we'll enter the palace itself. Here we have the guards while they have this nice ceremony. The building itself is very interesting. A real palatial office, you may say, with the beautiful halls and beautiful corridors. You can see just the chandeliers and all this unbelievable decoration inside. And we'll go to visit the cathedral. This is St. Vitus Cathedral, a cathedral that has been for almost 800 years in the process of being built. And you may say they never finish because there is always something else to do. I'm fascinated with the interiors, not only the exterior. It's absolutely stunning. And I'm especially fascinated with the stained glass windows. The last windows were designed in the 1930s by Alphonse Mucha. That is Art Nouveau, stemming from Art Deco and back, if you ever seen one. He has also an interesting Jewish link. He's the one who designed the posters for the theater shows of Sarah Bernhardt. She was this famous Jewish actress in Paris in the 1890s. So he helped her advertise the shows, but she brought him the fame because it was for her shows that he designed the posters, which made him very, very famous. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful stained glass windows. And outside we have mosaic. I mentioned gold. You have no idea how much gold you're going to see throughout your trip. In the churches, in the palaces, and in the synagogues, as we are going to discover very soon. Leaving the cathedral, we will walk through this golden lane. Legend has it that that's where the alchemists were working, trying to figure out how to turn iron or other metals into gold. Never happened. Not only didn't they find a way, but they never were there. However, one of the houses is very interesting for us, house number 22. That's where Franz Kafka came to work, being away from the maddening crowds next to his house. He was born right next to the main square, and he went to school right on the main square. His father had a bookshop on the main square, but that was too crowded for him. So that's where he came to find some peace and quiet. Today, this is the noisiest place in the city with hundreds of thousands of tourists walking by all the time. So we'll descend from the golden lanes and the cathedral into the lesser town, another beautiful part of the city with wonderful buildings. One of my favorite ones is St. Nicholas Church. This is a most typical example of Baroque with a story. The Jesuits were assigned by the Catholic Church to help bring back people to Catholicism after the Reformation. Lots of people left the Catholic Church. And now the Catholic Church is trying to make their churches more attractive. And look at the distance they went to attract and to lure people back into the Catholic Church, which they managed to do. Because, you know, until that, if you look at Catholic cathedrals and churches, they were most austere. You didn't have gold in the 12th, 13th century. They were beautiful, they were big, imposing, frightening, intimidating, but not that richly decorated. So here you can see some beautiful example of Baroque. We'll exit the lesser town to go to the old town, and we'll use a very, very special bridge. This is the Charles Bridge, built in 1357. Did you notice? 1357. They picked up also the date that should be 1 o'clock, 3 minutes on the 5th of July, and so on and so on. And that was supposed to be an omen, and that's supposed to guarantee that the bridge will survive. And guess what? The bridge did survive unto our days, even though you have hundreds of thousands of people crossing it day and night. Along the bridge, we have 30 groups of statues decorating it, each one with a special story. But before we leave the bridge, we will stop next to a very special statue. Look at this crucifix that has Hebrew written on it. On top, of course, is the Latin for Jesus Nazareum, Rex Judarum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But here is something very unusual. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Why? Because during the polemic disputations, when the Jews will profess to one God and the Catholic Church will adhere to the Holy Trinity, then the people debating the Jews will say, look guys, even in your text, it says, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. And not only that, those of you who are familiar with the Jewish prayer ceremony, when we utter these words, we actually lift ourselves up. We raise our heels like an uplifting to symbolize a spiritual uplifting. It is told, we will never find out if it's true, that a Jewish merchant was disrespectful when he walked by a church, he was spitting, and he was punished. They took all his money and used the gold to create this decoration, and he was hanged from this bridge and killed. Going into the old town and the new town, maybe we'll begin at the Slab Square. right by the National Museum, the statue of St. Wenceslav. By the way, that's the most popular meeting point in town, where you want to meet somebody, you have a date with somebody, or you fix a meeting for coffee, whatever. You say, let's meet under the tail of the horse, and everybody knows where the tail of the horse is. It's a huge square, even though it dates back to the 13th century. The museum behind us is splendid. And the 19th century into the 20th century municipal house, maybe one of the most stunning works of architecture, beautifully decorated. It has like a theater, eateries, auditoriums, and quite interesting. I'll do something unusual and I'll talk about hotels. There are many beautiful hotels in town. I will recommend two. Either this magnificent one, the Paris Hotel, again, a building that is neo-Gothic, decorated in the most unusual Art Nouveau decorations, because it has to be maybe the most romantic place. Can you imagine this suite? And you take the spiral staircase and you have your own balcony overlooking the city. That's where they'll serve you your breakfast or just some wine and cheese in the afternoon. The other choice will be the Intercontinental building, because it is right on the grounds of the Jewish quarter. That's the oldest synagogue in the world. Where else in Europe that is still functioning? Where else could you stay in such a location? So this will be just a couple of comments on the hotels. The Vojak Museum is one of the many museums dedicated to the musicians and the artists. There is an island in the middle of the Vltava River, so crossing the bridge will go over some water canals, and look at these beautiful decorations of the house. And every house has a story. Like you say, this house, that's where Albert Einstein used to attend some tea parties, hosted like a literary salon by some of the Jewish intelligentsia of the city back in the 20s and 30s. Magnificent streets, everything is pedestrian in the old town, with nice shops selling Bohemian crystal and glass, eateries, and everything is so beautifully decorated, not just for beauty, but lots of them have to do with the fact that, let's say you send a package somewhere. There are no street signs and there are no numbers. So you say, take this package to the Golden Star building or the Blue Fish building or the Three Ostriches or whatever. So all these items are beautifully decorating the buildings. This is the new City Hall. And the reason I put it here, look who we have outside, somebody with whom we're gonna deal a little later. This is the Maharal, Rabbi Loeb of Prague, the legendary creator of the Golem of Prague. I don't know about too many city halls where the building is adorned by a statue of a rabbi, hundreds of years of age. So that's quite interesting. Another historical site and very exciting is the Estates Theater. If nothing else, this is where Mozart has conducted for the first time the operas, two of the operas, and he stood right here. So they put this marker on the stage. Can you imagine what that means to any conductor to stand on the place where Mozart has done the premiere of two of his operas? And the building, of course, is absolutely stunning. The opera building is another building which is absolutely beautiful. And you can just imagine what an experience it is, other than hearing the most wonderful people with the great acoustics, but also everything is so beautifully gilded and so beautifully decorated. At the same time, next to all these old and traditional and historical buildings, we have very modern buildings. I like this one. This was designed by Frank Gehry. And you look around and it looks like a dancing couple. So everybody calls it Ginger and Fred, like Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. So this is the dancing house by Frank Gehry. Also here, we'll find lots and lots of modern sculptures. Some of them are very whimsy. Some of them are quite interesting to look at. Maybe the most important latest addition, just from a few years ago, is a kinetic artwork honoring yet another Jew, as we mentioned, Kafka, Franz Kafka. It is huge. It is huge. And each and every one of these blocks moves independently. So when they push the button and the whole thing starts moving, the likes of it you have never seen anywhere. So that's really another wonderful reason to travel and visit Prague again. I will not dwell too long on the food because unfortunately between the years of communism and whatever, the Czech food has dwindled into very basic, like goulash with bread dumplings. Everything is with bread dumplings. But I will highlight one modern place. It's a butchery which started making their unique sandwiches where everybody lines up. This guy is second generation. His father was a simple butcher under communist regime, you know, barely anything. And he took it to an art form where everybody comes to eat. And I'll conclude with the food by talking about the spa wafers. Started in Karlovy Vary, where we started. Everybody walks around nibbling on these delicious, very soft, very sweet wafers. It's very thin, yet it's filled inside, either by vanilla or chocolate, and enough with food. We'll come now to the Jewish part of our story. So, there was a Jewish quarter. Actually, it was even surrounded by a wall, very close to the river. Actually, for a long time, it was right on the river. You see, this is an extension where they were able to claim some more territory from the river. This is the river Vltava. So this was the Jewish quarter where Jews have lived for centuries. And that's where they had their synagogues, their yeshiva, the butcher, the bakeries, the tailor shop, and whatever, a big concentration of Jewish institutions. And when we walk today, we will do what? There will be millions of people who come. They are unimaginable number of tourists coming into Prague, very difficult to determine because not everybody flies in. Many people bus in, some people come for the day from Germany, from Dresden. You're just a few hours bus drive, you'll come for the day. But no question, you're talking about tens of millions of people who come here every year. The second most visited site in the city after the Old Town Square is the Jewish Quarter, where everybody comes to marvel at the very interesting architecture. These are new buildings which were built where the old Jewish quarter used to be. By the end of the 19th century, the sewage didn't function well, and they had some epidemics and what have you. So they have knocked down the old Jewish quarter to make room for these beautiful, by the way, these are condominiums, these are apartment buildings. Look how gorgeous the apartment buildings are. But the Jewish community made sure to preserve as much as possible of the historical buildings. This is the Old New Synagogue. Imagine 1250, with the small interruption during the war, it is continuously being used for so many centuries. And again, you step down because of course street level has gone up. So you step down, the walls are so thick. They are over 2 meters, over 6 feet thick in some locations. And that's where also the community had their vault. That's where they had like their safety deposit box to keep the funds they have raised. The interior is quite interesting with minimalist decoration, and everything is initials. Those of you who can read the Hebrew will figure out that's what we still have in many synagogues above the Holy Ark. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I've imagined God in front of me always. Some other initials will be Siman Tov Umazal Tov. And here we have something which I like very much. Gadol HaOmer Amen Yoter Mina Mevarech. Not to intimidate the people who cannot pray, who cannot read, and do not know the text, they write and tell them that the one who says Amen is more important than the one making the prayer, making the blessing. Because when you say Amen, you make a full-hearted attestation, you endorse it, you accept it. And I thought it was so beautiful, you know, to be considerate of the lower classes in society. It was in the attic of this synagogue where allegedly they found the bits and pieces of the broken golem. That brings us to Rabbi Löw, the Maharal of Prague. According to the legend, He has used his knowledge in Kabbalah, in mysticism, in Judaism, to create this kind of a figure, a mannequin, a doll, a creature of a sort, which was made out of clay. He took a small parchment. You know, we use the parchment for the tefillim, the phylacteries, the mezuzot on the doorpost for the Bible scriptures. And he wrote the tetragram, the name of God. It's a name that we don't utter, we don't pronounce. It is an interesting combination of letters that create verb to be in past, present, and future tense. Was, is, will be. In Hebrew, it was reserved only for the high priest during Yom Kippur, which we have celebrated just a few days ago, when the temple existed. Ever since, we don't pronounce the name. Apparently, he has put this piece of paper into the head of the mannequin, and it became alive. And it was a servant. He would draw the water and chop the wood, and he will protect the town, and he'll do whatever you told him to do. Comes Friday, the rabbi says, come over here. He will retrieve the piece of parchment from the mouth of the golem, and he will become a dummy again until Saturday night, when he'll bring him back to life. Except that one Friday, he forgot to do it. Shabbat is in, and everybody goes to the synagogues, and the golem has never seen it. Nobody bosses him around. Nobody tells him what to do. He got berserk. He started being wild. He started breaking things. They went to the rabbi, who was already in the middle of the prayer service, and they told him what happened. He said, okay, excuse me for a minute. He went out, called the golem, pulled out the piece. Come Saturday night, he took a stone and he smashed him to pieces, which were put in the attic of the synagogue. What a nice legend. However, the Alt Neuschul is the only synagogue in the world where they start the Friday evening prayer, they stop after a while, and they start all over again, like supposedly happened on that Friday night. I love this story. Isn't it absolutely wonderful? Across the street from the Altneu is the ceremonial hall of the Jewish Burial Society. Turns out that the Maharal is the one who has compiled the rules and regulations pertaining to the burial service we practice until today all over the world. And it is located right next to the famous cemetery. Inside, we have a series of paintings which are centuries old, quite interesting, talking about the different phases of bidding the dead farewell, preparing him, and taking him to be buried. Very, very interesting series of paintings. And we will leave the building and go into the cemetery. And here you are into some unique experience. Of course, first will be the tomb of the Maharalis, the most prominent one. Can you see there is a lion here? Because his name is Lev. Lev is for a lion. And that's how you typify people, sometimes using the symbols for their last names. Another interesting sage rabbi, which is a major pilgrimage site today for many of the Hasidic Jews, but I'm fascinated with the ordinary tombstones. You see, they had a limited amount of space to bury the dead, and they ran out of space. Where will you bury the dead? They put a new layer of dirt and buried the people, and a new layer and buried the people. Each time they lifted the tombstones up and up and up. You see, that's why they are so condensed and crowded against each other. Some places we found 11 layers of burial, one on top of the other. It's the eeriest, most unbelievable place, the likes of which you won't find anywhere else. The ancient Jewish cemetery of Prague, again, a major attraction. Is that an amazing story or what? The way that they had to build them on top of each other. Looking at some of the tombstones, you'll see that some of them were beautifully decorated, especially some of them for the ladies. She was a daughter of a rabbi, married to an important rabbi. A tombstone, which is quite interesting, the tombstone of David Gantz, a Jewish historian. And look at the years. He died in 1613. How do we know it's his name? Can you see the Star of David? This is David. Guz is a Gantz in Yiddish, so David Gantz. You look at the decoration on the tombstones and you figure his name. If you see these hands done like that, it means that the person who's buried here is a Kohen, is a priest, allegedly. Will you try it yourselves? Allegedly, only the priest, anybody who descends from priesthood can do that. Or you see, sometimes they have wolves, so you know it's meant a wolf. Or if you see a jug, it means he is a Levi. The Levites were the one pouring the water in the temple over the hands of the priest, and so on and so forth. So it is like a fascinating trip looking at the different symbols and different decorations. This person would be fishman. So you can see there is a fish. It will stand for fisher, fishbine, and so on and so on. Look at this amazing tombstone. Jacob Basevi was the owner of the mint. He was the one who coined the coins for the kings. And of course, after a while, when he minted many coins, they blamed him for using less silver than he was supposed to, and they killed him, and they never paid his family for everything he did. And this is another interesting tombstone of Mordechai Meisel. Mordechai Meisel was the mayor of the Jewish town, and he's the one who built right next to the Alt Neuschul, the Jewish town hall. So look at the building. It had a clock, which is something you know, with the Roman digits, with the Roman figures. And below you have a Hebrew letter, and the clock goes anti-clockwise because it follows the Hebrew writing from right to left. He also built a one unbelievable, magnificent synagogue, which we will enter. And this building, other than being so special itself, houses a small part of yet another unbelievable story. We'll never know the extent of it, but we know that the Germans were gathering Judaica pieces, other than many pieces they sold. For example, scrolls of the Bible. God knows how many were taken, how many were sold, how many were used for different purposes, but thousands and thousands, actually 200,000 Judaica pieces from all the Jewish communities in Bohemia and Moravia were gathered and were piled up inside the synagogue, which was like an unbelievable warehouse. Supposedly, they were going to build after the war a museum of an extinct race. And to do that, they made many people sit and catalog. Let us just settle for some figures which I find mind-boggling, and you'll walk around, and of course we will point out the different parts. I like to see the decoration of the synagogue, showing some things that you don't often see. Do you know the showbread? There were these pieces of bread put on a special table in the temple, or the priest, the stones on the priestly garment. And that is an unbelievable collection. They have here, are you listening carefully? 8,000 mantelpieces, 8,000 curtains from hundreds of communities all over the area. Some of them were embroidered by pearls. Guys, we're talking 16th century. Who's ever seen a pearl? How far did they have to go to fetch the pearls? And one is more stunning to the other. They were all hand embroidered with the pearls, with the silver thread, with gold threads, set with precious and semi-precious stones between the curtains and the mantle, the covers of the Torah scrolls. Isn't that unbelievable? So we'll see a couple dozens, and I'm telling you about 8,000 pieces, which are today, of course, stored in the museum. What we will just mention is that we have many scrolls of the Bible. You'll be able to read the whole text later on, but many scrolls of the Bible were later given to many synagogues all over the world. Now, that's a story that I found not too many people know about, the Jewish hat. Do you know that already in the 13th centuries, Jews had to wear a yellow hat? Why yellow, by the way, which later on became yellow for the Star of David? The streets were not lit at night. Turns out that even with the starlight or the moonlight, The yellow is the color you observe before you observe any other color. They wanted to make sure a Jew is walking ahead of them or coming towards them, and the Jewish hat. The Jewish hat, interesting enough, is the coat of arms of a town in Germany called Judenburg, the Jewish town. And look at this logo until today. That's where you go. You find out the coat of arms in the city. We leave the synagogue and we go to yet another synagogue. Everything is in the same vicinity. We're always walking around the cemetery. This is the Clausen Synagogue, which has yet some more collections, more items from that amazing collection of the Jewish Museum. And we come to another very moving, the Pinka Synagogue. This is a project which was started right after the war. The survivors came to the synagogue. Of course, they didn't need, by now, most of the Jews were killed. The few remaining Jews they didn't need so many synagogues. And they used the walls of this synagogue to write down the name of the nearly 79,000 Jews of Prague and the neighboring communities who perished in the Holocaust. So you will have the last name in red, and then the private names and the dates of birth and the dates of extermination. It covers many, many sections of this synagogue, and it is quite interesting to walk around, and it really gives a little different meaning. Otherwise, you know, we are numb to the numbers. One of the discoveries was made here by Madeleine Albright. You know, she was born here and she had no idea about her Jewish past. And she saw the Korbel family. Their names were written on the walls. Only then, right before she became Secretary of State, the New York Times published an article, and that's how she heard for the first time of her Jewish past. She was born in Prague. Another synagogue is the Spanish synagogue. It was not a Sephardic community, but the building built in the style of the Moorish architecture, again, was a storage place for lots of the artifacts, especially the covers, the curtains, and the mantelpieces were stored in this absolutely magnificent synagogue, the Spanish synagogue. So now you understand why did I say that the Jewish Museum, the Jewish Quarter, is the second most visited place. There is hardly anybody who comes to Prague and doesn't visit the cemetery and the synagogues. And for many of them, it's the first time they ever set foot in a synagogue and to see all these interesting Jewish artifacts. I put here a story, which is one of many. Can you imagine 1899, they found the body of a woman, and what do they make sure of it? Because it is right before Easter, the Jews must have slaughtered her to use her blood to bake the matzo, a most typical blood libel. Which, as you know, lasted even our friends from Poland know the town very well, the town of Kielce, 1946, imagine, still a blood libel. I mentioned the president of the Republic. He was the only politician who stood against it, but it took many more years. Look, from 1899, it was only in 1918 when he was finally pardoned. Of course, he was totally innocent. I mentioned it because the transportation leading the Jews to the different camps came against a backdrop. It was not a new surprise. There was no ghetto in Prague. So the Prague Jews and the Jews from the neighboring communities were taken on these, you see it's not very far, 64 kilometers away, to the town of Theresienstadt. And that became the ghetto for the Prague Jews. And many more Jews were brought from many other countries to this place. Look at an aerial photo of this community. It is a fortress, a military town where they have the barracks where the soldiers and the families would live. They had the moats, which were used as gardens and fields to grow some produce. Everything was surrounded by a wall. Actually, there were two such towns. There was a small camp and a big camp. Visiting the small camp, you might only to see the cell, which is like very historical. That's where they've imprisoned Gavrilo Princip. He's the one who assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And that is what has led, right, to the outbreak of First World War, so he was detained in this jail. But we will go further to see what happens. Look at the places where Jews were brought from Bohemia and Moravia. So you see all these communities where, and some of them were already ghettos. Everybody was brought into Terezin. The buildings themselves, some of them are from the 18th, some of the 19th century. It was honoring the empress of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Maria Theresa, Theresienstadt, the town of Theresia. And inside we have stories. Now we begin the most difficult part of the story. What happened in Terezin? The Germans wanted to keep a place where, in case somebody will ask, where the heck are you transporting all these millions of people to? Especially after some Jews were taken, about 500 Jews were taken from Denmark. Most of the Danish Jewry, as you know, was rescued by the Danish resistance movement. They were taken into small boats, which took them to bigger fishing boats at sea, and they were smuggled to Sweden. Sweden was neutral, and 7,800 Jews survived in Sweden. Some others were brought here, along with people from Prague, as I mentioned, from the Netherlands, Max. There were many Dutch Jews who were brought here. Jews were brought from Vienna, from various locations. I'd like to share with you the story of one young boy. His name was Peter Gintz. He must have been the most gifted, talented boy. He wrote poetry, he wrote essays and stories. He published a newsletter, like a children's newspaper called Vedem, We Go. He painted, he made drawings. Look at this drawing. It shows planet Earth as seen from the moon. He thought that's what the face of the moon looks like. And he was dying to get to the moon, which he never did, of course. However, the Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon, the first Israeli astronaut who went into outer space, a grandson of a survivor, took with him a copy of this drawing by Peter Gintz into outer space. Unfortunately, as you know, he did not make it back alive to planet Earth. So this is a picture of Peter Gintz. That's the drawing, and that's the tumbling stone outside this house in Prague. Which brings us to the story. I mentioned the Denmark. The Danish king Christian X was an incredible character. The only one who would stand up and talk and write to the Germans. He was occupied, but he was like almost sometimes threatening them, demanding things from them ferociously. And he said, I'd like to check on my Jews. Immediately, the Germans were getting ready for a visit of the International Red Cross. They started the process called the beautification of the camp. They made the Jews create an orchestra. That was not difficult. There were many Jews who were so gifted and talented who were brought there. They brought there maybe the creme de la creme of anybody they could put their hands on. The writers, the poets, the musicians, the painters, the sculptors. One gentleman, a very tragic character, Kurt Geron, a German Jew who became very famous actor and movie director and producer. And he was assigned by the Germans to create a movie, A Gift of a Town. Supposedly, Hitler gave a gift to the Jews, a town which was given as a gift. We have here the movie he produced in two parts. And what we have here is a movie that was done after the war, combining the bits and pieces of the movie he made, along with what really happened there, with description, with paintings of the inmates who showed us the grim reality. And here I put also a link to a very long movie, a documentary about the life of Kurt Geron. Can you imagine? He played with Marlene Dietrich. He was a colleague of Billy Wilder. He was supposed to go to Hollywood. He was requested to go, but he was offended. They didn't offer him a first-class suite on the cruise boat, so he never went, and he was killed. Look, at such a young age, he was sent, October 44, he was sent to Auschwitz, he was killed. These are pictures taken from the movie. Supposedly, the Jews were listening to lectures. They were all, look at them, so nicely dressed with this, with the ties and the jackets. They showed the children, supposedly they were playing. These children had no access to dolls. They were given to them just for the movie. They made scenes like coffee shops, people sitting reading the newspaper in a coffee shop. The newspaper were 3 years of age. There was not a single drop of coffee to be had for miles around. And they made the children all dress up, look clean and decent, and they rejoice. So when the Red Cross did come to visit, can you see June 23rd, 44, they went back and reported there is nothing wrong there. We didn't see anything abnormal. Actually, there were 2 visits, a Swiss doctor and a Danish doctor came later on. But these are the real paintings of the inmates, the artists who have described to us what really took place inside the camp. The funeral hall, imagine there were 2 funeral halls. One of them was Jewish and the other one was Christian. People who were 2 or 3 generation Christians were still considered by the Germans as Jews, and they were sent to Theresienstadt, where many thousands of them died as well. A very incredible story is the transport of children from Bialystok. You'll read about it. It's a long story. It's an unusual chapter in the history of the Holocaust in general, and Theresienstadt in particular. This was taken by the Swiss doctor, Maurice Rossel. Took him years to come to terms with the deceit, where they were welcomed by the Germans, dined and wined, and left the next day without really seeing anything, and reported that everything looked very normal, but you'll read about it. Imagine, they even printed money bills. Of course, they were worth absolutely nothing, but it was just for Theresienstadt, and look, supposedly is Moses with the 10 commandments in Hebrew. They had them in different denominations. They had 50 marks, 100 marks, 20. They were totally worthless, needless to say. Today, we have a couple museums. One of them is a general historical museum of the story of Theresienstadt, and the other one in the Magdeburg Barrack is the art museum. That's where they've compiled thousands of paintings and drawings. Recording of music. There were 2 operas that were composed and performed in Theresienstadt. One of them is the Brundibar, that's the bumblebee, and the other one is the Emperor of Atlantis. And you can hear it. They put for you the soundtrack and you can hear it. And it's an incredible visit inside. Maybe one of the most moving stories is the story of the children and the children painting. This is Mrs. Friedel Dicker Brandeis. She was an architect, an artist, and a teacher. And she is the one who encouraged the children in Auschwitz, in Theresienstadt, to make paintings and express their feelings and emotions. And she hid in the attic of the Magdeburg Barrack, she hid thousands of their drawings that were found later on. And this is what finally was used to create many publications, but one of the ones that became very famous in the 60s, I never saw another butterfly. There are no butterflies in the ghetto. Now comes yet another amazing story talking about Denmark. 20 odd years ago, somebody who lives in town today, the town has a couple thousand people who live in the old buildings. He was cleaning one of the storage chambers. It's like packed in the end of the alley inside the inner courtyard of the building. You'll never see it. And it was dark, there is no window inside, but he came with the torch and all of a sudden he saw some paintings and drawings and writing on the wall. Knowing that this was a Jewish place, he went right away to the management of the museum. They couldn't figure out what it was. They called somebody from the Israeli embassy in Prague, and you can imagine the excitement. It was a hidden synagogue. By the way, personally, I have to share with you something. I have been to, unfortunately, dozens and hundreds of killing fields, ghettos, extermination camps, horrible mass execution, whatever. I have only one picture at home from any of the locations, and that is the picture. Why? Turns out these were the Danish Jews. They used it, the elders of the Danish Jewry. They used it as a prayer place, and they painted very cleverly these items. If the Germans would have found it, they will all be doomed. And this is typical of what you will find in a Jewish synagogue. May our eyes witness your return to Zion in compassion. But what is so fascinating is that they wrote, you don't find it anywhere else. They said, our brethren of Israel are scattered, being subjected to horrible atrocities. They are being killed, burned, tortured, humiliated. With all that, we did not forget your name. Please don't forget us. I am so moved by this expression. God, full of mercy, please retreat from your wrath. Please do us justice and retrieve, and so on and so on. And guess what happens? Soon afterwards, an incredible initiative, originally by the Danish king, along with the Swedish king, the Swedish Red Cross sends dozens of buses, some of them were fit as ambulance, and they retrieved those Danish Jews from Theresienstadt along with many other Jews and Jews from other places. Those of you who have been with me in Jerusalem, remember in Yad Vashem, we went to see one of the buses. It is kept and displayed in Yad Vashem. With the story, we have reason to believe that thanks to that initiative, up to 25,000 Jews were, and not only Jews, I must say, inmates from the various concentration camps were rescued and brought to safety in Sweden. One couple who survived the Holocaust, they were from Poland originally, they remained in Sweden, and every year until they died a few years ago, they used to organize school trips in white buses from Sweden. They brought every school kid they could bring with them to see the sights of horror in the concentration camps. Look, by the way, at one of the drawings of one of the inmates describing what the Germans were trying to show, but you see what it is? It's a camouflage. It's like Disneyland, right? Like Universal Studios. There is nothing behind but misery and suffering and the observing eye of the Germans who supervised all this deceit, all this charade. And that's what it really looked like, the suffering, the torture. And subsequently, by October 44, the last Jews were sent away to Auschwitz, to different locations, to different camps and ghettos in Europe. Today we have a few memorials. A crematorium is there next to the cemetery. People were not killed deliberately here in large numbers, but when they died in the winter, you couldn't possibly dig a tomb for them. The soil was frozen, so their remains were cremated, and now that's the memorial over the cemetery. Today in Israel, we have a special museum dedicated to Theresienstadt. It's called Bet Theresienstadt. It's in a kibbutz, Givat Chaim, and they really offer us a very interesting look into the story of the Holocaust, but especially of Theresienstadt. Wow, I hurried up to try to show you as much as possible. I hope it was not too quick. But if anybody has any questions now, or any comments, I'll gladly take your questions.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's almost an impossible task to ask you to do not only Slovakia and the very difficult story of Slovakia, an unknown story to a large extent, but also Prague, Theresienstadt, and more. And you did a brilliant job as always. Just we will, those that have to go, you know, we fully understand, but those that can stay for maybe another 10 minutes or so, if you do have any question and any comment, I just want to mention that Bob McCormick, thank you so much, Bob, for directing us to another website, the Synagogue 360 website, to have a look inside, a virtual look inside the synagogue. We will send you that link in our email. Thank you very much for doing that. And the connection to Tulsa, unbelievable, in the United States. And maybe if anyone has questions or comments, please do put them in the comment box. Jacob, do you mind maybe very shortly to mention the tragic story of Lidice and of
Yes.
the resistance, you know, of the Czech and Slovak, because we did speak about the collaboration. So
Yeah.
just to speak about
Yes,
that.
it was resistance. Actually, the big resistance was in Slovakia, less so in the Czech lands. The oppression was terrible. It was Heydrich who was made the super governor over Bohemia and Moravia, and it was two Slovak freedom fighters, resistance fighters, who have ambushed him in the area called the Prague 5, one of the residential neighborhoods. As he was driving in his open car to the Prague Castle, he set his office in the Prague Castle, like a royal presence, like where the president is, which was like a place for royalty. So as the car was making a turn, they had to slow down. And that's where they took advantage of the fact that the car slowed down. They started shooting. Of course, the machine gun didn't function. They threw a grenade, which injured him. He did not die right away, but he died 5 days later. The funeral was a major Nazi event. Hitler himself attended the funeral. And a few days later, they picked up a town at random, the town of Lidice. They went into town to kill each and every person in town. Before they did kill the adults, they took the children. The children were blonde, blue-eyed, they looked Aryans, and they were sent to Germany to be given to childless German couples. All the women and young people who were in the village were killed on the spot. There were some villagers who were in the mines. When they came out of the mines, they told them, don't go to the village. Everybody is dead there. They hunted them down regardless until they killed each and every one of the people in this village. Unfortunately, it was not a unique case. Unfortunately, they did have such cases of retaliation and revenge, not only to express their wrath and anger, but as a deterrence, to intimidate, so nobody will even consider such a thing. But those two Slovaks, they did manage to get rid of one of the worst beasts, I may say. You know, he was among the people who gathered in the Wannsee conference, and he was a major architect in many of the events that led to the extermination of the European Jewry. Yes, the town of Lidice.
Thank you very much. And again, we can speak for an hour about that and the church where that you can go next to the dancing couple. You can go and see a small museum there as well. Max is asking
if I may,
yes,
just a second, because you mentioned the church. I know it's very controversial, and I will definitely not take a stance because I think it's going to be many years before we'll be able to come up with, what should I say, united approach or united stance. The Vatican has criticized Tiso's actions because they thought he carried it to an extreme. He said, Tiso, remember Monsignor Tiso of Slovakia, he said that getting Slovakia rid of all the Jews is a Christian thing because the Jews are a negative element. He was reprimanded by the Vatican, but by then he felt too omnipotent and he couldn't care less. Sorry, I had to make this comment. In defense, to an extent. I know we have a full bag, right, about the church, but that's something I had to mention.
Absolutely. And again, lots more that we can speak. Let's just take 3 short questions and we will close with that. Max is asking, what is the origin of the Jews of Prague? How did Jews arrive in that area?
So they must have been Jewish merchants who traveled across the continent, still already in the Middle Ages. Actually, the first testimony, the first evidence of their presence dates back to the 10th century. A Jewish traveler from Spain was traveling on behalf of the Spanish kings. He traveled in Europe, and he reported about a town which was a crossroad with a major marketplace where he saw some Jewish people there. Ibn Yaqub was the name of this traveler. He was like an official servant in the palace of the Spanish king. So most of them came, we should believe, in the 12th and 13th century, because they filled a very important role in the commerce, in the financial and economic life, subsequently cultural life. Definitely 19th century, music, art, philosophy, science, and all these fields that we know about.
Thank you very much. And maybe just the last question. There are lots of lovely resources that we will also send you. Of course, Laurent Binet, wonderful book, HHHH, films. Please watch Liz Elsby's lecture about the art in Theresienstadt. It is on our YouTube channel, Liz Elsby from Yad Vashem. Thank you, Anna Maria, for this suggestion. So maybe just from one of our colleagues, our educators, Paul Blocher, maybe if you can just a little bit unpack the selling the Jews first. Tiso basically selling the Jews first, the women, then, families in 1942, then stopping, not deporting, but then in the end deporting all the Jews. What was going on?
So it was Gizi Fleischmann. She arranged what she called work brigades. And she was able to get permit by presenting these Jews as essential for whatever public works that were needed. The truth is, they were needed. Many of them were highly educated, so they wouldn't only be a simple clerk. They actually ran departments. That was one thing. The big thing was an incredible amount of $55,000 that were gathered from the local community and paid as a bribe, both to Cherny and even to Tiso personally. And that's why the transportation stopped for nearly 2 years until they resumed later on.
Again, complicated. Thank you for answering very, very shortly. But we will have to close. So just to say, absolutely fantastic, Jacob, how you managed to do these two countries in less than 90 minutes. It is absolutely unbelievable. And we really are so grateful to you for taking us slowly in those wonderful trips. And we will have more in the coming months, and we will visit many other parts of Europe, from Greece, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Western Europe as well. So please continue to follow the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. It is just so wonderful to have you, so wonderful to have Pinchas, to have Maud with us, the two Holocaust survivors that are such close and wonderful friends, and so wonderful to have other friends from all around the world. And thank you all for coming. And please join us. Now it's Sukkot, so we're having a little bit of a break to let you enjoy the Jewish holidays. But please join us in the week of the 13th, 12th, 13th of October. We'll have a poetry workshop, and then we will have a series of 2 lectures about memory and confronting the difficult past with Professor Jonathan Janssen, with Professor Shirley Gilbert, and with Freddie Mutangua. And it will be an amazing, amazing series about statues, memorials, museums, and how do we remember difficult past. And then much more to come in October and November. So Chag Sameach. Jacob, what can I say? Do you want to say the final word to say goodbye?
Thank you, everybody. Just thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to have seen the names and faces of so many people I met before and I love very much. Special thanks to the survivors who joined us. You are a beacon for us. You are a big light in our life. And what you do is something very special. Once you hear a survivors, once you hear a witness, remember, you become a witness. So I believe that we are inspired by your stories, by your heroism, to carry on the legacy and to make sure that all these things will not be forgotten. It shouldn't happen again, not to the Jews and not to anybody else. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you and good night and Chag Sameach to all. I think that Jacob and everyone deserve a clap. So thank you. Good night. All the best.
Good night.